Hi, today I want to talk about something that is very important, and I think we have all been there. I want to talk about why we feel stuck despite awareness. So, why do we still choose inaction even though we know what action to take? So, I have gathered my notes on a screen in front of me to make sure that I keep track of the important things that I want to say so I don't leave them out. So if my eyes are shifting back and forth, it's because I'm following my notes from the screen. Personally, I feel like I have everything in front of me. I can see the fire and I have the fire extinguisher, but I just decide not to use it. So I want to go into psychology of this. Why do we do this? And whether it's overwhelming emotions, overthinking, or feeling like we're wired to fail, these invisible barriers can leave us stuck because most of the time these are not really easy to pinpoint. Even though it takes up a lot of space in our mind. First is emotional paralysis. It occurs when overwhelming feelings such as fear, anxiety, or guilt leave us unable to take action. Emotions like guilt, shame, or anxiety can cloud logical thinking. It's like having a foggy windshield. You know where you need to go, but you can't see the path clearly enough to take the first step. Fear of discomfort. Growth often requires facing discomfort, whether it's vulnerability, change, or hard work. The fear of confronting this emotional discomfort can make procrastination a short-term escape that often becomes a temporary escape that shields us from these uncomfortable feelings, even though it compounds the problem long-term. So it's immediate gratification over long-term gratification. Second, we have overthinking and decision paralysis. So, what do we do most of the time? We overanalyze tasks, and this inflates their perceived difficulty. So, for example, cleaning a room might snowball into planning a full renovation in your mind. This, of course, delays the action because it feels impossible to complete the whole task at once. Fear of suboptimal decisions. Perfectionism fuels overthinking. Perfectionism causes a lot of problems, not only for this, but it is something that is very wired in the brain and it's really hard to undo it. So we worry about the perfect approach, and this leads to avoidance out of fear of making a mistake. So we are so obsessed with achieving that, the thought of even making a single mistake leaves us paralyzed. So instead of acting, we delay to avoid potential mistakes or outcomes that don't align with unrealistic expectations. Ironically, this fear of making a wrong decision leads us to inaction. It doesn't even help us to achieve a higher standard of our goal. So this ultimately leads to a very this ultimately leads to the least effective choice. Too many steps. When the solution seems complex or involves many steps, it's common to overanalyze or ruminate, leading to inaction. Even knowing the right steps doesn't make the entire journey seem manageable. So breaking that down can seem like a lot of work, because when the task appears convoluted or labor intensive, it's easy to overthink each step to the point of complete inaction. This mental exhaustion keeps progress out of reach. Then we have decision fatigue. Life often presents us with countless choices. These decisions demand our energy and focus throughout the day. When our cognitive resources are already drained, even minor choices can feel overwhelming. A task that requires any additional effort is avoided because our mental tank is empty. The more options or decisions we face, the harder it becomes to take decisive action. This is also used in consumer psychology. The less options there are, we are more likely to pick out of those choices and buy them. Guilt and its impact. Root of self-sabotage. This is going deep into our brain because we have deep-rooted subconscious beliefs about self-worth. Thoughts like, I always mess up, or I don't deserve success, act like invisible chains keeping us stuck. And most of the time, these thoughts are very subconscious that we do not even realize we have these thoughts. But unfortunately, they have such a detrimental effect on the outcome. These internalized narratives cause us to unconsciously align our behavior with self-sabotage, as avoiding opportunities, procrastinating, or giving up before we even start. Learned helplessness. Repeated failures in the past often create a mindset where we believe no amount of effort will lead to success. In the book here, The Experience Machine, it talks about how our brains are literally an experience machine, because everything we do, every behavior that our brain chooses to do is based on our past actions. So it's kind of like a guessing machine where our brains keep guessing the threats, the outcome, the conclusion of whatever we're going to do, because it wants to be prepared for the outcome. So this means that the past experiences that we had, so for example failures, if we had failures, our brain thinks that those failures are going to happen in the future as well, because that's what we know from our experience. The brain wants to be prepared for the outcome, so it wants to protect us by associating the past experiences with the future experiences. So we were talking about the learned helplessness. This perception strips us of hope and motivation, making progress feel impossible. Even when new opportunities arise, the weight of previous experiences leads to passivity rather than action. It's also that our brain, whatever is familiar to our brain, we feel safe to that familiar experience. For our brain, it's easier to just guess simply from the past that whatever we failed, that we will fail again, because something new coming to us as an experience is more threatful rather than the past action. Cycle of inadequacy. Guilt about not taking action feeds a toxic cycle of shame, inadequacy, and self-doubt. For example, procrastinating on a task may lead to feelings of failure, which further erodes self-confidence. This negative feedback loop reduces motivation. So you see, everything is linked to the other. Whether one happens before or the other is not really that important, because they're all in a cycle and they all feed each other. So yeah, what did we say? We said learning from the past repeated failures, our brain learns it, and then that leads into self-confidence, and that leads into the negative feedback, and that results in no motivation. Then we have emotional overload. So guilt is not a passive feeling. We're going to be talking about guilt a lot, because it's also attached really firmly with why it's easier for us to choose inaction. It's emotionally heavy, guilt, and it drains significant mental energy. Instead of sparking meaningful change, it depletes the resources where we need for problem solving, planning, and decision making. So over time, the mental exhaustion created by guilt becomes like another barrier to productivity, replacing momentum with emotional fatigue. Lack of motivation and neurochemistry. So lack of motivation is of course one of the main points here, and I think it's one of the easier points for us to indicate. We're going more into the science behind it a little bit. Dopamine deficiency. So dopamine is a neurotransmitter associated with motivation and reward, as we all know. It plays a central role in fueling our drive. It creates a disconnect between wanting to act and feeling capable of doing so. Low dopamine levels, often seen in conditions like stress, depression, or burnout, can make effort feel exhausting and unmotivating. I also prepared a little bit of a note how this feeds addiction. Addiction can develop when procrastination, avoidance, and guilt lead people to rely on quick dopamine fixes or emotional escapes, creating a reinforcing loop that's difficult to break. So to deal with that very intense feeling of guilt and shame, we look for the quick dopamine fixes. It's just much more easier for our brains, instead of sitting down with it, instead of absorbing it. Avoiding discomfort combined with quick dopamine rewards turns temporary relief into a default coping mechanism. Like I said, executive dysfunction. Often seen in ADHD or high stress states, this inhibits prioritization and planning. Even simple tasks like deciding where to start feel overwhelming. Chronic stress forces the brain to prioritize short-term survival needs, making long-term goals and sustained motivation harder to achieve. Cognitive conflict, or as I like to call it, cognitive dissonance. This is one of my favorite terms in psychology. And it's kind of like an umbrella term covering a lot depending on the context. So in this one, let's see what it is. What is cognitive dissonance? This psychological discomfort arises when our actions don't align with our values or beliefs. For example, you believe you're disciplined but find yourself procrastinating on a project. This is very personal. The clash between who you think you are and what you're doing creates a mental battle, heightening guilt and further stalling action. Yeah, this is an important one. Okay, think of it kind of like a scale maybe. We feed our brain millions of times a day with what we do and how do we see that action, and we change our perspective on who we are. That it's based on our actions, but our brains are super quick to pick it up. As time goes by, it layers it up, and it just altogether it constructs this idea of who we are based on our actions. So here, as it says, like, you believe you're disciplined, but you find yourself procrastinating on a project. So depending on the person, we could be, let's say, delusional and still think we are disciplined even though we are not. And this might go a little bit into positive reinforcement, but at this point it's not, because it's not helping you, because you are tricking your brain into thinking very different based on your actions, because our brain always wants the reality. It chases reality. So if your action is something very tangible, your brain will want to take that action as it is and turn it into what it means about yourself. So if I am being disciplined, I would like to think I am disciplined. But then we go to the other end of the spectrum, where we are too much on the negative reinforcement, where even we are disciplined, we don't give ourselves enough credit. So that spirals into having such high standards that we are never able to meet. This also creates a very vicious cycle. So it's most of the time just the best to be in the middle of that spectrum. So to see our actions through a lens that is aligned with reality. But at times, depending on our mental state as well, it can shift from one to the other extreme of the spectrum as well, and that's okay, because it's very volatile. How it blocks action. The mind tries to resolve inconsistency either by adjusting beliefs, I'm just lazy, or minimizing the importance of the task, it's not that urgent. As we talked about it before, how it prioritizes the short-term action, this is one of it. This defensive response can exacerbate avoidance instead of prompting change. Recognizing what you should do, for example, I should exercise or I should study, creates a tension when your actions don't align. This dissonance is uncomfortable, but rather than resolving it by acting, many people ignore it to avoid deeper emotional conflict. It's also important how we word things, because the link between words to our brain is very emotionally responsive. All of the words that we use are linked to our brain on an emotional level. So if we say, I should exercise, instead of I would like to exercise, it would be nice if I exercise now, it kind of helps the brain to be a bit more easygoing and not like have it as an overwhelming task. So we said we would be talking about guilt a lot. Why guilt feels so overwhelming. Identity attachment. When guilt becomes tied to self-image, for example, I'm lazy or I'll never change, it stops being about one task and becomes an all-encompassing criticism of the self. This is very common, and this is really, really, really something that we should not do, because then, as I said, we attach our actions with our self-worth. This is very fundamental. We do this as humans. We have to do this to survive, because know thyself. If we don't know ourselves, we don't know our actions, and we don't know our position relative to the world. So we need to know who we are, and we need to place ourselves within that context, whatever this is, in the world, in a social group, in a space. So when we turn those words into, we take them very personal, so we make our actions who we are, it kind of creates this identity attachment. Associating our actions with ourself and who we are is very important. Of course, we do this with ourselves and with other people as well. Of course, your actions dictate who you are, but when we are dealing with our actions, these actions are a bit more daily, not so important actions. For example, like procrastinating and not doing simple tasks. Then it's important for us to change the wording. I am not talking about like ethical actions or like very important actions. Those definitely should dictate who we are. Shame spiral. Guilt unchecked often morphs into shame, leading to feelings of worthlessness and a belief that change is impossible. These are all linked to each other. So the identity attachment, where we link those words, we link our actions to our self-worth, and then that creates shame as well. So we are talking about, we talked a lot about why, the underlying reasons and the science behind it, and how our brain is tricked. We talked about the short-term reliefs, the avoidance, and what it can lead to. So now I want to talk a little bit about how to break the cycle. So here are some practical strategies. Reframing our thoughts, as I talked about this. So we can shift our self-talk from judgmental to curious. I'll give you like a very concrete example. So instead of saying, why am I so lazy? What makes this task feel so difficult today? So what I do with the task is not about who I am, but it's about the external factors and internal factors as well. So taking a step back and realizing this already is a big step. Acknowledge cognitive dissonance and use it to realign your actions with your values. So instead of using cognitive dissonance to escape, focus on small steps that match your deeper intentions rather than wrestling with internal conflict. So don't make this thing about you. Just remember that you're a human. You can break the tasks down into smallest possible steps to make them manageable. For example, cleaning could become more simple. Pick up one piece of clothing instead of making the whole task of cleaning the entire room. You can do the 2-minute rule, where you commit to working on a task just for 2 minutes. Often this initial effort overcomes resistance and sparks momentum. So most of the time, as we said, it's like the harder part is to begin. Instead of allowing guilt to feed self-condemnation, recognize it as a sign that you care. Reframe your thoughts from I'm failing at this to I'm human and I care about getting this right. Celebrate progress, not perfection. So even if you are not able to apply all of these, even applying just a few of them will still break the chain. So perfection, we said, is the enemy of a lot of things. And here we want to acknowledge even the smallest victories. Completing tasks, no matter how minor they are, it releases dopamine. So this strengthens the motivation to keep moving forward. Create reward pairings for tasks, like listening to music while tidying up, to associate effort with pleasant experiences. This is also a very beneficial little trick. whatever it is, if it's music or something else, just linking it with a pleasant experience will give you an easier time. Resolve cognitive dissonance gradually. So instead of letting dissonance paralyze you, use it as a sign of what you truly value. For example, procrastinating like an essay might reflect a deeper passion for the subject. So prompting you to take the first step is going back to that passion for the project instead of the outcome, which is the essay. So use this to guide you back to your core motivations. Externalize accountability. So once you share your goals with a friend, coach, or mentor, or family, it keeps you accountable, of course. So you're having that external party invested in your progress. This not only reduces the emotional toll of cognitive dissonance, but adds structure and accountability. Why it's okay to feel this way. This experience isn't about laziness or failure. It's a sign of being human. Each small step you take toward the action is a progress, but we want a balance of it. As I talked about the positive and negative reinforcement before, we do want to kind of not go to the extremes of the spectrum. So while we're still being realistic about our goals, our potential, and our actions, we still want to take into account that we are human, we're not a machine, so our brain is it doesn't work the same every day. There are a lot of external factors that affect how well we feel and if we are capable of completing that task, and it's very layered in the brain. So even sometimes if we do not see the why and if we don't see the underlying cause, it is so detrimental to the outcome of what we want to do. It's not that simple. It's not like a formula. If I do this, then I will achieve that. Our brain is wired and wired and wired. The chemistry of the brain also changes over time, even though it's not really a substantial change. It's also really good to kind of recognize and do like a self check-in, because you don't feel the same every day or like the week before. So it is nice to try to incorporate these little solutions, like these little tricks that I talked about. And the thing is, it's kind of like a paradox. So if we do nothing about doing nothing, then we're not resolving the problem at all. We're avoiding it. So that means that we are aware that we're doing nothing, and we're aware that we're doing nothing about nothing. So it kind of like gets bigger, like this snowball effect. So then it is very crucial to at least understand that we need to do not acting on our goals. And the key isn't about fixing yourself, but rather learning how to meet yourself where you are, one small step at a time. So that's why I said it's very important to know yourself, because knowing yourself allows you to avoid comparison. Every person is very uniquely different. Knowing what kind of standards you hold and knowing your relation to the goal is very important, so you can come up with those solutions yourself as well. These are not always visible or immediate, so the fact that you are already aware of it is a step further.
You fucking hell.